And now it's time for Healing from Within with your host, Tony Valen.
Welcome to Healing from Within. I'm your host, Tony Valen. You can contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search Healing from Within with Tony Valen or the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. Joining us on today's show is Matt Collman. Matt is nationally accredited and internationally known as a psychic reader. You can learn more about Matt Collman by going to zenithpsychicservices.com or call 727-560-2764. You can also like Matt on Facebook /Matt Collman. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony. It's good to be on the show.
Well, thank you. We're very excited to have you, as we are with all our guests. So let's get started with the first question I always ask all my guests. What are your gifts and how did your journey begin?
Yes, I consider my specialty to be predictions. I am a psychic. I do very little mediumship. Mostly what I do is bring insight into the present, insight into the past, and I'm able to predict the future with a high accuracy rate. I predict with names. I predict with times. I bring specific details to the table. Now, many years ago, I started to notice extrasensory activity after what I will call an initial trauma. I call it initial trauma. That's the first trauma that I remember experiencing besides the birth trauma at birth, and it happened at 4.5 years old. Now, the particular abilities that I have, I don't believe that I have abilities that others don't. In other words, I believe that everybody has extrasensory gifts. However, I do believe that everybody's abilities are very unique, like a fingerprint. Now, I believe that mine, for whatever reason, awoke. Either they awoke very early as a result of the trauma, or they were some form of psychological mutation as a direct result of the cause of the trauma itself. Now, I call that experience at 4.5 years old an initial trauma because I suffered terribly from what I will call a secondary trauma after that, which I'll talk about a little bit. So I started doing readings many years ago, 23 years old. Back in those days, I was doing tree work as well, and I came back to Florida 11 years ago, and I've stayed in the same place for that amount of time, and I currently work out of a store called Celestial Circle. I have my own business, of course, later on, in an attempt to try to, figure out how I was going to heal, and figure out everything else that humans try to figure out, where they fit in, where their niche is, and everything like that. Of course, I got very deeply into spiritual things as an answer to a lot of my problems. Of course, that has proven to be an answer to all of my problems. As a teenager, I got deeply into metaphysical things. I started reading books. An avid reader for many years. I would say on average, I have read a nonfiction book a week for 20 years. Now, that 20-year period of time, we'll let that be finished about 4 years ago because I don't read that much anymore. So anyway, it's just more of a metaphor of how hungry or how driven I was to try to, figure out or put together my own riddle.
You are the first intuitive or, psychic or whatever you want to call us that has told me that you can actually predict time accurately. In other words, you tell the future and you're able to give a timeline. How does that work for you?
I clearly will tell them that I do specific predictions. However, I'll tell them that I can be wrong. And based on the feedback of my clients, I'm about 85 to 90% accurate. I feel completely comfortable about that percentage of the details of my prediction will come to pass, and it doesn't surprise me if a detail here or there doesn't. how do I do time? The entirety of my life has, I've been intrigued with trying to crack the future. So I have crystallized systems as far as predicting time, and I have a kind of surreal method of doing it. I say surreal because it is patternless, and I'm finding that is becoming more and more accurate as time goes on. But I will. Usually it'll be, I'll give a window. I'll predict within a week or two and stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Do you think that trauma has to do with awakening our senses, our psychic senses? Because I know that many of the interviews I've done in the past, interview after interview, it seems like everyone that seems to be awakened was either awakened by some type of trauma or they awoke at a very early age as a child.
To answer your question, yes and no. Okay, I believe that it can and does awaken the abilities. I also believe those abilities can awaken spontaneously for no apparent reason without any apparent outside stimuli. It can just occur, okay? And I don't think anybody comes into this world unscathed. Okay, starting with the birth trauma, there's a series of traumas that will occur between birth and the age of 1 based upon misperceptions and miscommunication, the infantile stuff. So I believe that everybody has a degree of healing or a degree of trauma to heal from. Of course, in some cases, that trauma can reach into very deep dimensions if it's very intensive.
That is true. I never thought about it that way. What about your childhood set you on a quest for healing?
So basically, this is what happened, okay? In Central Florida, there is an ear, nose, throat doctor who was, running a practice, and he had a little bit of extracurricular activity going on, and he was performing myringotomies without anesthesia, okay, which was not unheard of, okay, and that's not that in itself is, in my opinion, bad enough, but there was some extracurricular activity that basically brought the government down on him, the child after me, and he was shut down. Of course, the immediate means of shutting him down was tax fraud, and then he was dealt with after that. But, basically what happened is I was, what he was doing, it wasn't just me, is he was performing these procedures without anesthesia, but he was also trimming and dancing around the soft tissue of the inner ear, making incisions, and there was definitely a method to, and something that he was receiving from it. So he performed that procedure on me without anesthesia. I was in a straitjacket, and it included incisions in the eardrums and cutting the soft tissue around the ear. As a doctor, he had some definite understanding, in the body, the process of the body going into shock, and it seemed like he was playing with that whole process. And, long story short, the metaphor I used was kidnapping. This was not a kidnapping. The reason I had used that metaphor at that time, it was basically in honor of my mother, okay? Because my mother had no idea what she was doing when she dropped me off at this house office in nowhere land in Central Florida, okay? She was manipulated by a neighbor. So I used that metaphor. Technically, my mother didn't know about it. That's the only reason, I used that metaphor once. But that's what happened. Secondary trauma was very difficult because I had no control of my bodily functions until the age of 8. Mm-hmm. So for about 4 years there, in public school, with children, I would lose control of my bladder. And these things, sitting in class with kids, it was horrible what I had to go through. I was sent home repeatedly. That was very, very damaging. I started to pull out of that a little bit at 8. I had a series of problems, of course, as a teenager. It wasn't long before I started self-medicating with substances and stuff like that. But as a teenager, I went through a series of rehabs. I remember in one of them I was diagnosed up and down the board, bipolar, schizophrenic, borderline personality, every bunch of other things I don't even remember, medicated every which way. I've been through the whole gamut as far as the conventional forms of healing. And there was actually a psychologist early on that, as a teenager, I did connect to. And I just had this, it's almost like she had a look like, you're nowhere near ready yet. But she put effort forth for me anyway. But that's kind of a rough picture of my childhood. My parents, they went through their own forms of hell over this. They didn't understand exactly what happened or why things were happening. My mother, it just destroyed her. There were a lot of family consequences of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So let me change it up a little because we will get back into that a little later. Tell us about your high
Yeah.
IQ gifted status and starting college just prior to high school. Did you feel different as a child growing up with all your gifts?
Yes. Yes, I did, of course. Outside of the social trauma, of course, that was, all that was one of the many ways I felt different. My family, I grew up in a Jewish family, with doctors, came from financial resources, and 7 cousins of us. And I remember, I think it was 3rd or 4th grade. I don't know, one of the cousins got an IQ test, and everybody in the family has to get an IQ test. So I got mine tested, and mine was the highest. Okay. And, I was the one that was supposed to become the most successful as far as, outer appearance, worldly success. I was to be in line for the typical, everything that my family, the professionalism. And I basically turned around and threw all that to fingers. I don't know how I knew it. I knew that it was shallow. I knew that it was unfulfilling. Mm-hmm. I don't see anything wrong with wealth or financial resources or material abundance and sustenance. The only thing that I struggled with and what I grew up with, it wasn't the wealth. Okay, it was how the people around me were depending upon the wealth for all forms of fulfillment and happiness. And I saw clearly that it wasn't working in regard to that. So when it came to what they wanted for me, to go to college, get my master's, doctorate, become an engineer, doctor, whatever, I was not going to be on board with that simply because I didn't see it working. Okay, and I was more concerned with trying to figure out a way to feel comfortable in my own skin. Mm-hmm. My IQ test turned out very high. I was placed in gifted classes. I started college summer of 8th grade. I quit in high school, graduated high school, went back college a couple times, just never really had a drive for it. And that's my college story. But I remember sitting in I was so frustrated at that time. I was going to summer school. All my friends were playing. I was sitting in this USF, St. Pete, and it seemed like most of the kids in that class were Far Eastern. And I remember taking physics there. I remember taking other things, and I was not into it. But that's to answer that question, yeah.
Yeah. So it just seems like you were, I understand where you're coming from. It's not so much about the success, but it just seems like you didn't see any fulfillment in the people around you with success, so you didn't think that was going to help you heal or fulfill yourself as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell us about the wandering decade in your life. Was this due to the trauma in your life, or were you searching for healing?
Yeah, I left home early, 17. I graduated high school early and left. I came back to Florida. I headed up to New York. I wandered. And I was writing at the time, doing readings, a lot of speaking, spent time in Texas. I spent time in New Mexico, brief times in a lot of different places. I had a really, really hard time getting it together. I couldn't seem to stay in one place. I had to move around, multiple relationships. I couldn't, have any stability in personal relationships, whether family, romantic, friendships. I could not really get it together. So I was basically trying to find a way to feel comfortable because I was very, very, very miserable. I had a very hard time coping with just day-to-day simple things that people take for granted. I basically decided, I don't know when it was some kind of inner shift that I was going to find out how to heal and basically what all this is about. I was going to find answers out for myself, and I did that, and I traveled around. I met a lot of people. I started getting into metaphysical practices, other spiritual practices, unconventional. I would try anything. I did anything, and all the bits and pieces definitely added up to bring me far into the healing process, and it wasn't until later that there's some specific practices that have carried me. I say that I have healed completely, from that trauma and the secondary trauma. There was another trauma at the tail end of the secondary trauma, sexual abuse. I've healed from that as well. The stuff that I deal with nowadays is residual stuff. A lot of stuff's going to be past life stuff.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, in your travels and whatnot, you had exposure to the Native Americans out west. Tell us about your experiences with them.
They were able to do with me what nobody else could. They were able to see what was going on with me deeper dimensionally where nobody else could. Okay, now when I'm talking about Native Americans here, I'm not talking about metaphysical bad stuff. I'm not talking about some nicely published book by some Native American dude. Okay, I'm talking about I was out west and I was hanging around guys that didn't know how old they were. Okay, they didn't have driver's licenses. They weren't registered with the system. Okay, they were off the grid, and they were still deeply embedded in their culture and their practices. There's one woman that took some time with me. Her and another guy I would consider to be two primary people that basically helped initiate me deeply into my life purpose, really. She was, is Lakota Sioux. She's a female sun dancer, and let me say this since it's on air, and I understand that there are traditional tribes and traditional Native America that hold fast to the old ways, which didn't include the female sun dancers. Most of the tribes have accommodated that, and let me tell you something. Whether you're for it or not, most of the Native America is recognizing it. I'm not going to say if that's right or wrong. I'm not Native American. But I'll say this, that woman there had some healing powers. She pierced in the shoulder. She attended these sun dances, full-blooded. Raven medicine, she did a lot of work with me. I did a lot of work with her, too. Mm-hmm. I spent some time with some other guys out there. Yeah, there was a lot that transpired when I was in New Mexico. I healed a lot there. I woke up to a lot. Very important period of time in my life.
Absolutely. Now, you also mentioned sun dancers. Tell us about the sun dancers.
Basically, I met them through her. She was a sun dancer, and she knew some others. And sun dance is a most sacred ceremony to the Native Americans. It would be equivalent to the cross, or even more sacred than that to them. It's an amazing, amazing ritual ceremony. I spent some time researching it. It is definitely channeled from higher consciousness. Basically that, the dancers prayers will be put up into the tree, and the dancers will dance for a 4-day period of time, fasting and in the heat. And, when they decide it's right, they're hooked up, they're pierced, they're connected to the tree. And then when they decide it's right, they'll break loose, and that blood will fly up into that tree for atonement and for the recognition of all the prayers and the coming to pass of all the inner desires of the people. So that is a most sacred ceremony. She was around some very, very, powerful people. She ended up getting a scholarship. She went over to China. She's a practicing acupuncturist to this day in New Mexico. Brilliant woman. Spent a lot of time with her and another guy. So, yeah, that's my experience with Native Americans, some of the sun dancers.
If I was to, for lack of I don't even know if I'm going to put this in correct words. So sun dancers are like the equivalent of Wiccans, except instead of using roots or whatnot, they're using dances to, what was the purpose of the dance, I guess, is what I'm asking.
The purpose of the dance is to basically bring in the presence of Great Spirit to such a degree that healing and unification of the tribe will take place. It has to do with it has to do with atonement, it has to do with answering prayers or bringing the power, accessing the power for the prayers to become fulfilled. Answered prayers and healing.
You also taught various classes. Can you tell us about some of the basic things that you teach people?
I do a lot of teaching, spiritual discipline, psychic defense, awakening to life purpose, intuitive development, and stuff like that. Some of the basic principles that I teach people, basically what I try to help them, or I do help them, access their own intuition. And I teach them that that their intuition is their next right step that is always available in the present. Okay, and I also teach them in order to become aware of intuition, it's going to be necessary to settle down all the thought forms that are going on inside the brain. And how I tell people to settle those down, I'll tell them, to become objective when it comes to their thinking process. In other words, for them neither to believe nor disbelieve their thoughts. And after a while practicing that, they won't be emotionally responding to the thoughts. Therefore, the thoughts will settle down, and they'll become less and less. And then intuition will begin to shine forth like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. And intuition becomes strong. And I teach people to, how to walk through the fear in regards to trusting intuition. And usually there's going to be some issues, as to why people don't trust their intuition. And I help people clear those up. I help with little conceptual adjustments that align them into where they can become in sync with their intuition and no longer exploited by the zillion ways of society.
So tell us about your daily routine. How do you live your life on a daily basis?
Okay, yes. My daily routine. There's some inspired literature that I read a little bit of. I practice what's called Qigong throughout the day. It used to be at routine times, and now that's changing. It's becoming more as needed, which means that I'm actually practicing more than when I was doing it routinely. So at least twice a day, I practice Qigong. I practice meditation. I've practiced meditation many years in posture. I do different types of meditation, transcendental, Taoist, some of the Buddhist, the Zen meditation. There's different things that I've, learned on my own that I practice in meditation as well. Those are the three main practices. The two main practices would be my meditation and my Qigong. And reading the inspired literature, I guess I would consider that kind of a practice, but it's not. It is, I guess, that'd be a third one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, my routine's so different than it used to be. If someone were to, if there was a reality show in my life, it would be probably utterly boring to the masses. Okay, I do live a very impeccable lifestyle. My diet's impeccable. I'm not a drinker. I'm not. You're talking to somebody here that hasn't so much as had an over-the-counter pharmaceutical or medication, no Tylenol, Advil, any of that kind of stuff, and going on 5 years. So anything synthetic, I am definitely going to tune into and definitely, be very cautious about it getting near my being or my body. And so long as I have a conscious choice, I don't ingest synthetic things. So my diet's impeccable. I've experimented with many diets, probably all of them, until I figured out how to communicate with my body by way of my intuition, and I've settled into a comfortable diet. I like to take walks. I like to watch movies on occasion. I don't watch regular television, and I spend a lot of time in contemplation. I love listening to music, and I love my work.
Yeah.
I love my work. I love helping people and helping them take steps forward. I like helping people take big steps forward, not just helping them feel better for an hour or two. And I've seen some major, major progress, such a blessing to see the transformation of my clients and the people that are in my life.
To make a lifestyle change, not just a moment in time of peace and,
Right.
What is Qigong? I've never heard of that.
Yes, Qigong, I'm going to explain it as simply as possible. It's a very ancient modality. Qigong, I believe, is a most ancient modality. The basis for the I Ching, acupuncture, Tai Chi, all forms of martial arts, in my opinion, it's actually, I believe it's bits and pieces and fragments from a prior physiological technology from an advanced civilization. Call it Atlantis or Meriamu, whatever. I believe that some of that survived in China. I was able to preserve it. Now, it involves, it's kind of a mix. It's a mix between yoga and martial arts. It's a little bit different than Tai Chi. Tai Chi I would consider a little bit softer, although there are soft forms of Qigong, but what I do is a little more strenuous than that, but it's not a fitness.
This is Tony Valen, host of Healing From Within. You can contact me, Tony@TonyValen.com, or visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter @TVHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search Healing From Within with Tony Valen, or search for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. We are talking to guest Matt Collman. Matt is nationally accredited and internationally known as a psychic reader. You can learn more about Matt Collman by going to zenithpsychicservices.com or by calling 727-560-2764. Like Matt on Facebook /Matt Collman. Matt, I'm going to read a post from your Facebook that I saw, and then we'll talk about it. As my head was pressed against the steel table, the straitjacket became my cocoon. The instrument going into my ear at first seemed invasive. The pain was unanticipated, like 1,000 hornets, faster than light. As the pain intensified to the edge of what my psyche could handle, the instrument was withdrawn and reapplied multiple times, bringing me to the fringes of a peaceful abyss. Then my thoughts disappeared, and I began observing his actions upon my body with the innocence of a 4.5-year-old child that I was. My eyes went out of focus, and I could see what was really going on. My nearsightedness began, a deeper dimensional gift. As I relaxed into the shock that my mind and body was conceding to, I realized that this infuriated him. As he flipped me over like a pancake, the blood coming out of my ear was a strange relief. I intuitively knew that if I didn't come out of the shock and began feeling pain again, then it would be worse on my body via his calculated rage. I relived the birth trauma at the moment, feeling rejected by my mother as her contractions were pushing me out of the womb. Then it dawned on me. This was in sync with the convulsions that my body began having as the eardrum of my other ear was cut into. I screamed, "Bloody hell!" He felt relief. Based on this, what experience are you talking about? Is this the actual abuse that happened to you?
That was a nuts and bolts description that I had posted on Facebook.
Was this the abuse from the doctor? In other words, I guess what I'm trying to ask you.
If you're asking if there was any form of sexual abuse,
yes.
No, there was not. Not in that instance. Later on, I endured a whole different thing. No, however, there was, and as a 4.5-year-old child, you ask, how do you remember it? Well, it's interesting because that natural little amnesia veil is usually around that age, and for whatever reason, that occurring at that time took away that veil because I'm somebody that actually remembers being born. I think it has a lot to do with reliving the birth trauma at that time. But no, he cut into the eardrum. He cut the tissue around the ear. It's the force with which he pressed my head on the table. It's the energy and the movements of his muscles. You could tell that he was angry. You could tell that he was getting off on it somehow, possibly sexually, but he wasn't doing anything sexually. That could have been something that he would, take home with him and think about later or something. I sensed possibly he was that dark. Yeah, to answer your question, that's the best way.
Yeah, I know he's a doctor, but I'm kind of surprised that he did this much with your ears, and it didn't affect your hearing at all?
I had major drainage issues. Now, it was I had to have some reconstructive and had some things, redone in there some months later, and but no, it didn't. The fluid issues had been on and off, but I actually got to, there's so many forms of contraction that can happen in the human body, not just muscle. There could be tendon contraction. I think even marrow can contract. So there were a lot of contraction stuff that I've worked out through the years, and the fluid and all that stuff is slow and normal. But I came out of it with my hearing. Yeah. And, if you were to Google, laryngotomy, they'll tell you, you can read about it. They make an incision in the eardrum and historically, it was done without anesthesia on occasion. However, it was necessary that the ear wasn't infected. Mine were actually infected at the time, which made everything worse. Everything he did was against the law, and it all caught up to him. This guy's dead now, but this was back in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, and I can definitely understand the child part of it, because it seems like as children, we may experience things that somehow or the other seem to be either erased or pushed to the back of our minds, and I guess we really don't understand what happened at the time, or do we really care? We just care about the now, which is kind of amazing of children, don't you think?
Yeah, it is.
How does someone heal from such mental, physical, and emotional abuse? I mean, I know you were a child, but it had to have been somewhere in you that you had to get rid of it. How did you heal from all that?
Most people don't heal from traumas that severe. I would say that there's others, that we have young men coming over from overseas. Some of them have been tortured. There's a lot of things that happen to those people that are extremely traumatic. Now, the chances of people healing from a trauma that like what I experienced is highly unlikely. Okay, it's highly unlikely. What it requires is, through the process of healing over many years, to get down to that deeper dimensional level where that trauma was, I had to face fears of death and mortality repeatedly, all the fears of the unknown, every superstition, taboo. I had to empty myself out and deal with the most fundamental base fears to even get anywhere near that trauma. And then once I tapped it, it started to come up, and then my body, it was a delicate balance of what my psyche could handle, couldn't handle, what I was doing at the time. But if somebody, I believe this, and listeners, I'm talking to you, and the whole reason I'm here today, and everything I'm saying, it may seem like I'm talking to Tony, but I promise you I'm talking to you. And if you're sitting there and you're confused, and you've gone conventional, you've gone unconventional, you've done everything, if you still have a desire in your heart to heal, I'll tell you straight up right now that you can and you will. If you have that desire in your heart, you will heal, and you can. But here's the thing. You cannot do it all by yourself. You have got to let the universe do some work too. That was something, I was so frantic in my own attempts to healing, I was very impatient. And that worked against me, for a long time. And, what really made the major difference to me was, finally integrating a couple spiritual practices into my life on a daily basis. And I tell people this all the time. I'll say, you know what, your belief system's wonderful, great for you. It's intricate. It's, you have strong beliefs, but ultimately, what's most important is, are you accessing the power or not? And I had all kinds of beliefs for many years, but I was not able to access the power to come into my life and produce the changes that I needed in order to continue growing. When I found the practices, I began accessing the power. Accessing the power is a hell of a lot more important than believing in the power. Once I began accessing the power, my life started to change. There's some things that I intuitively know. I don't have to cling to my beliefs. In my meetups, I talk about beliefs within the context of belief, but when it comes to my beliefs, I don't cling to them. When it comes to my beliefs, I don't cling to them, and ultimately they're not important. Ultimately, what's important for me is staying centered, staying in tune, and accessing the power on a daily basis and allowing it to infiltrate my life.
What is the power? What do you mean by power?
That's a good question. Well, that's what everybody's fighting over, probably. What is that power? Right. What is that consciousness? What is that spirit? I can call it the absolute. I can call it God. I can call it Goddess, Great Spirit. I can call it what I want, higher consciousness. Whatever I call it, however I interpret it, what I intuit is that it's beyond what I interpret, beyond what I believe, beyond what I define, beyond all my notions. It's forever beyond my ability to comprehend it. Therefore, I don't waste time trying to. I use that same precious time in my practices, and I access it. Yeah, is there any way to comprehend it? And, I know it through experience. And that's enough. I can't sit here and tell you what it is. In the moment that I start to interpret it, I cut myself off from its power. So I'm not so concerned about calling it one name or another. I just, I like to stay in sync.
And how long did it take you to learn how to access this power and to become this person that you are now today?
The entirety of my life. I would say that my healing journey started when I left the house. It's been a long healing journey. The last 4 or 5 years has been, it has accelerated big time. That's when all the tons of addiction, addiction started dropping one by one years ago. I was addicted to everything. I mean, everything, and there's nothing now. Freedom is amazing. It's just consistency. I didn't do anything special other than just want to heal and have this childlike belief or faith that if the universe is going to allow a trauma, then the universe is going to also provide the means for healing. And I just believe that. I don't know how I knew it, and I just held to that, and as a result, it's coming to fruition.
So I know that you had an NDE or near-death experience. Tell us about your consciousness floating out of your body. What did you see? How did you feel? What did you know?
There was too much anesthesia. And there was a 3 to 4 minute period of time where my heart, was mostly stopped, and there was some fibrillation going on in there. And long story short, the third shock of electricity was what kept me in the body. Okay, now to describe the experience, dying, it's really, really, really similar to waking up. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And when you do, you remember. But what was weird, it's kind of like this was I don't remember this supposed to happen. This is weird. This is kind of this is a wires cross. This is a cul-de-sac. This wasn't supposed to happen, but I was a little confused by it. But when I died, it was as if I woke up. It felt like my consciousness was centered from basically my solar plexus chakra to the top of my head. I basically went through matter. Seemed as if it was just dream stuff. I mean, it's the same thing from that vantage point. And I went straight into the sun, right through the sky into the sun, the sun. Had no idea why. I didn't plan it. And it felt like it almost felt like I was kind of on a machine, or I was being gently pulled, because it was at a rate that was perfect, and there was all kinds of becoming aware of myself occurring as I was being caught up into the sun. There was becoming aware of everything at once, and passed through the outer layers. I remember it felt like the outer layers were like fiery layers of holiness that purified my consciousness. And as I passed through those layers, it seemed as if it was liquid, liquid diamond cities of light. There were beings in consciousness, not life as we know it, white light. And I noticed that there was this phenomena happening toward the core, the spinning in every which way, every direction. Reminds me of the old Bible passage in Genesis where it talks about the ever-turning sword guarding the way to the tree of life. I don't know why. As I came back and grew up, I started thinking, something about that. But anyway, just maybe some similarities. So anyway, I passed through into the spinning. Simultaneously came out into this whole other expanse. Let's just put it this way. There's infinite other side. There's every kind of heaven that you need or want or has to occur, and, for your soul to be fulfilled. There's everything. There's things that manifest as you're experiencing them and fulfilling, and things being revealed, and everything making sense, and everything at once. Absolute bliss. I remember the colors green and white as being the most dominant, loving, pure, colors in that whole thing, like where, literally that was somehow the green and white that was over there is somehow in some strange way connected to the life on our planet, the life everywhere, DNA. The electricity jarred me back in my body, okay? It just jarred me back in, and I'd float up again and have another experience, different, the second time, and a smaller one the third time. The third time, that electricity grounded me back into my own EM field, and my heart found its own bandwidth and started pumping again, and here I am. So
Wonderful, yeah. Tell us about Zenith Psychic Services.
Zenith Psychic Services is an LLC. It's my new business. Now, I've been doing readings for a long time. I decided to open up an LLC. I could do other things under it if I want. I have some other ideas I might bring in there. I work out of the store. Actually, I say primarily. Everything I'm doing is out there. The way I set it up is I'll do some things out of the store, but not much. So Celestial Circle is where I do the readings, and that's in Palm Harbor, Florida.
So what's next for Matt Collman?
Okay, what's next? Well, when you showed up at my meetup and asked me to appear on the show, and we talked, and I mentioned to you, how I'd gotten invites for podcasts and radio. I just never had the motivation until I met you. A lot of things are happening at one time. You've mentioned to me, and we've talked about getting my own show going. Mm-hmm. And also, I have a book being worked on, being compiled. Half of it's still with the compiler. The other half is already with the editor. It's going to be on ebook and stuff like that. I'm not going to post the title of it for certain reasons yet. Anybody who's connected to my Facebook, my website, or the Celestial Circle email list website is going to find out about all my developments. The other thing I got going is I started doing the artwork on a tarot deck, and I've got some cards done. I've got a lot of them done. I got plenty more to go, and I'm doing the art and the book. On my Facebook page, there's some pictures of that stuff. I want to, I don't know why I thought it'd be pretty cool, being a psychic to I guess use my own deck and stuff like that. If other people like it and want to buy it, then so be it. But I have those things going. I guess the radio and the two books with one of the books with the tarot deck.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, I really want to thank you for being on the show. You inspired us, you've informed us, and we just love having our guests teach and help heal everyone. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Tony, and to all the listeners out there, it was an honor for me to share this with you. Thank you.
Our thanks to Matt Collman for being on the show. Matt is nationally accredited and internationally known as a psychic reader. You can learn more about Matt Collman by going to zenithpsychicservices.com or calling 727-560-2764. Like Matt on Facebook /Matt Collman. You are listening to Healing from Within with Tony Valen here on Blog Talk Radio, airing Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Contact me directly, tony@tonyvalen.com. Please follow the show on Twitter. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search Healing from Within with Tony Valen or the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. Thank you so much, and love and light from all of us here at Healing from Within.